Sir? I have some news. It's reports, sir.
Yeah, come on in. If you're here, I'm assuming it's important.
I'd more so use the word frightening, sir. Gridiron football is a growing machine of death. Take a look, there's been 19 killed this year alone. It's the most in a single season ever. And injuries are at their highest too. These are young men, even one girl, the first female victim yet. Most are younger than 18, they're trying to play a game, have some pleasure at school, and they're dying.
These are accurate?
Yes, sir, they are. Printed just this morning. These are across the country as we speak.
You know, one of these numbers is my kid. In the injury column, thank God. Not a death. But he cracked his ankle pretty badly a few months back.
Teddy's exaggerating a bit. His son, Theodore Roosevelt Jr., did indeed break his ankle clean earlier in the football season, but he came back from it just a couple weeks later. Injuries be damned, the president's boy was addicted to football. He was undersized. It had taken the kid over half the season just to fight his way onto the freshman team, but he arrived and proved himself tough. When his Harvard team took the field in their annual matchup against Yale, Theodore Jr. was there, fighting, competing. He broke his nose in the game, but he stayed on the field, eventually having a black eye start to form during the game from the hit, and only then, after that, was he knocked completely unconscious. He kept playing. Like any good addict, his drug actively harming his life did not stop him. This was a hard-fought game, a slugging fest, brutality on both sides. The score was 0-0. Pure football. In the second half, when Teddy Jr. got knocked out cold for the second time in the game, losing consciousness twice in just a couple hours, there is little doubt that his brain was damaged permanently and irreversibly. His pops, the president, who will one day survive a gunshot to the chest, seems to have a bit of a soft spot there in his impenetrable heart for his little boy. Though Sr. had chosen not to play football in his time at Harvard, mainly because of his poor eyesight, he did fight for the team's existence against people who already feared football was too dangerous as early as the 1890s. Harvard and Yale actually had their annual matchup canceled for a couple years because of obscene violence in the 1894 edition. This game, known as either the Hampton Park Bloodbath or the Springfield Massacre, depending on who you ask, sent 5 individuals to the hospital. 4 more were ejected, 2 guys had a fistfight that went on uninterrupted for a couple minutes, and another guy got a really bad concussion. But he stayed in the game. His teammates had to point out which way on the field they were going before every play. Then he got a second concussion and he fell into a coma for like 7 hours. Many sources falsely reported that he had died the next day, but he was fine. He woke up eventually. Oh yeah, and then one guy jammed his finger into the eye of a Yale player and he began gushing blood out of his eye. He stayed in the game for another quarter. Amongst the coverage, the New York Times dropped the line, quote, "The record of French duels for the last dozen years fails to show such a list of casualties as this one game of football produced." Jesus. This was the epitome of football violence. It was the star witness for people who wanted to get rid of the sport. It led directly to the banning of the flying wedge play, arguably the most dangerous in football history, where players would literally just lock arms in a circle around the ball carrier, then like slowly trudge forward on the field while the defense tried to break inside. Everyone got hurt. It was a moving wall of men running over other men. This is what our game is built on. This is football. The flying wedge play was banned in direct response just a couple months after the whole, bloodbath massacre ordeal. This game, and others like it, that growing amount of kids dying, the youngest being a 13-year-old boy this season, yeah, that all made the conversation to ban football a very real one. Roosevelt, while serving as the New York City Police Commissioner in the 1890s, had made his feelings known publicly, saying, quote, "In life, as in a football game, the principle to follow is hit the line hard. Don't foul and don't shirk, but hit the line hard." A couple years after he was elected president, he again spoke up on the issue. Quote, "I believe in rough games and in rough, manly sports. I do not feel any particular sympathy for the person who gets battered about a good deal, so long as it is not fatal." This was said in 1903. It gives you about as good an idea of who Teddy Roosevelt was that two sentences can possibly give you. The President of the United States, just as he should be, was a football guy. So, it was a real problem when, in 1905, two things hit Teddy squarely and unavoidably in the face. Both injuries and fatalities were clearly on the rise. No one could deny that. The game was actively getting more dangerous. And secondly, maybe more importantly, on a human level, his boy, the president's boy, had become the person getting battered about a good deal. His flesh and blood was one of those statistics. He was reasonably close to having been one of the deaths. With this in mind, it's not hard to understand the move that the president made next. The crazy part is that it's often credited with saving the sport of football. There is no concussion crisis in football. It doesn't exist. That's not a thing. It's like saying the ocean has a fish crisis. We're not living in the concussion crisis now. It wasn't in 2015 when Will Smith made a movie about it. It wasn't in 2002 when CTE was popularized. It wasn't even in 1905 when Teddy Roosevelt supposedly saved the sport. Because through all of those times and all in between, head trauma has been a part of the sport. Football is concussions. That has never changed. All that has, the thing that ebbs and flows over time, is how much we care. Us, as football fans, are just getting out of what I would call the third or fourth great caring crisis in the sport's history. We get worried, right? Some articles debate if the sport is about to enter its downfall. Youth football might even see their numbers of kids drop for a few years. Then, not much happens. Maybe we ban a play or two, make a new penalty to protect guys, force them to wear fluffy helmets on their heads. In reality, we put a band-aid on it. These changes don't actually make the game safer. We just believe they do, and eventually we forget about it. Trust that flimsy little band-aid and stop caring. We move on, and football keeps on rolling. The first great caring crisis was taken care of by that man named Theodore. Teddy Roosevelt decided to call a meeting. He summoned representatives from some of the best college football teams in the nation. A Princeton, a Yale, and two Harvard fellas sit down in the Oval Office. It was a snobby day in D.C. Other coaches and notable football personalities were also invited. The get-together was pretty much just trying to clean up the sport of football, attempting to make it safer. What materialized from this meeting was an entire new organization. Months later, in March of 1906, prior to the next college football season, it was formed officially. 62 colleges came together to make up the Intercollegiate Athletic Association of the United States, or the IAAUS. Give it some time, it'll catch on. This group will be monumental in the evolution of football. You can't really argue that. In the coming years, they would legalize the forward pass, create the neutral zone in between offensive and defensive lines, and require both teams to agree on referees instead of one side supplying them. These were changes made to football for the sole reason of making it safer. A few years later, in 1910, the IAAUS realized that their name wasn't catching on, and they changed it to the NCAA. That's right, the NCAA was literally created as a way to just make the sport of football a little safer. And the story is clear to understand. It's easy. It's perfect. Teddy Roosevelt, a known football guy, watched his son get hurt and decided to save the sport by intervening at its most dangerous time to make the game safer by forming the NCAA. It's a great headline. It's not really true. What just happened to you, to me, to football fans of 1905, was the first of many times that we were told football had been saved. The sport was rescued, made safe, no more danger. It was the first of many times that we were lied to. Numbers tend to be pretty honest little fellas. The band-aid that Teddy Roosevelt put on the sport of football was the NCAA. It was these various rule changes we just went over. But did they actually make football safer? No. People kept dying, a few less at first, then a few more. The number wouldn't reach its peak until 1931, 25 years after the NCAA was formed, and according to most, Teddy Roosevelt saved football. 40 people died that year, double the amount in 1905. That is nearly a full modern-day NFL roster's worth. Now, you could argue that football was getting more popular in general and thus contributing to these higher numbers, but that's really not true. The NFL wasn't even formed until 1920, and it took a good decade or two for them to establish any footing in the national sports world. Football was growing very slowly over a long period of time, but that doesn't account for the sport having no drops in its death rates when it was supposedly saved. Make no mistake, football was not saved in 1905, and it never has been. It just escaped, as it is so good at doing. Mike Webster. His name was Mike Webster. He grew up just like you and I did, so long as you and I grew up on 600-acre potato farms in Wisconsin. He idolized the game of football, and with that location, the Green Bay Packers. Childhood is kind of weird. His parents divorced, his house burnt down. He barely escaped with his siblings and mom all alive, but the Packers played every Sunday. Watching his team became a bit of an addiction. Don't ask a good football fan to hang out after church. They already have plans. He was a big boy. Once he got into sports, it was wrestling that he went out for. After that didn't spark a passion, he tried football. Just a kid, doing different things, figuring out his direction in life, using sports to do that. Aren't you Mike Webster too? The Packers still played every Sunday. He sat on the couch watching with his mom. She paid half attention. Wasn't a huge football fan herself, but Mike, he made sure to explain every play to her in depth. What football fan, what monster can't relate to that scene a little? Mike was all of us. He grew up watching big guys hit each other hard, worshipping those big guys. Then he became one of those big guys. He loved the sport for what it was, macho and manly, artistically violent, charmingly dangerous. He never knew exactly what he was risking. None of us do. No one ever told him. Was Mike supposed to know? Sure, it's guys running into each other head on as fast as they can over and over again for a couple hours. But they're wearing helmets, shoulder pads. Did Mike Webster deserve to be warned of what was at risk? Is it common sense? Should someone have told him? Should Teddy Roosevelt have stopped him? Would he have listened or cared if anyone did tell him? Or was Mike's addiction, his nasty little habit that he got hooked on as a young boy, just too strong to overcome? He went to Wisconsin on a football scholarship. The once big boy was now in the only line of work in America that made him undersized. 6'1", 240 pounds gave Mike a different experience than most on the offensive line. He wasn't smashing face masks with guys every play. His size often gave him the built-in advantage of being the lower man, a crucial one on the line of scrimmage. This meant most plays consisted of Mike Webster's head smashing into a defensive tackle's chest, shoulder pads, forearms, maybe even their head. But it was always Mike's head. He wasn't a receiver or a running back. He wasn't taking the huge, super hard highlight hits that break your brain instantly. No, this was just non-stop, repetitive smashing of brains over and over hundreds of times a week for decades. Lower impact, higher repetition. Less quality, much higher quantity. But even these smaller type of hits, they add up. They don't stop adding up. And eventually, they break through. He got drafted to the Steelers in 1974, a late pick in the 5th round. He was just a part of what would become the greatest draft class for a single team in NFL history. The Pittsburgh Steelers drafted 4 players who would all win 4 rings with the team as fundamental parts of their soon-to-be dynasty. The center of these teams, some of the greatest in sports history. Not the heartbeat, but dare I say the brain of the upcoming Steelers dynasty, was their center. His name was Mike Webster. Terry Bradshaw touched his butt more than he has ever touched anyone else's. I hope. Mike was never diagnosed with a concussion in his playing days, not one time. Of course, that doesn't mean he never had one, just that he never let anyone know he was hurting bad enough to get diagnosed. 12 years later, he was a different person entirely. His name was Mike Webster. That was the only thing that hadn't changed. Here he is in his truck, actually, my apologies, a black pickup. He would get upset at that distinction. He gets upset a lot. He's sound asleep in the truck, which could further be identified as a house. Mike Webster lives in the black pickup. He's found a nice long-term parking spot behind the Blue Eagle Market in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh, the city where he thrived, the city he was, and still very much so is, a hero to. Their hero slips away from sanity, alone, asleep in his car, with burn marks on his legs and super glue in his mouth, outside a discount grocery shop in Pittsburgh. A picture is worth more words than I could ever give you. His wife left him. It's difficult to blame her for doing so. Mike lost his mind. There's no better usage for the phrase. He couldn't remember simple things and would become agitated with himself and the world when he would forget them. He was never able to hold a job after his playing days and lost a lot of his saved up NFL money on bad investments. Once before the divorce, he urinated in his oven in front of his wife and kids. Occasionally he'd be out driving around town and he'd forget his way home. He wouldn't know how to get there and he'd have to call a friend for help. Right now, outside the Blue Eagle Market, in his black pickup, he is indeed sleeping. He's just got some scarred, almost burnt spots on his legs. They come from the police-issue taser sitting in the passenger seat next to him. Unable to fall asleep and desperate to do so because of chronic back and knee and head and finger and foot pain, Mike Webster had bought a taser a while back and began shocking himself asleep. According to his son, he would zap himself 10 to 20 times in order to relax and put himself out. He began seeing doctors that varied in their explanations. He was diagnosed at least once with brain damage from his football playing days. Most agree he was already disabled before he retired from the sport. The doctor who gave him that brain damage diagnosis was so taken by Mike's behavior that he recalls asking if he'd been in a serious car crash recently or at all in his life. Mike replied, as accurately as he could, "Doc, I've been in 350,000 car accidents." But not much else could be said beyond, you hit your head a lot and it probably messed you up. They didn't really know how to stop it. They couldn't rationalize why Mike would bark at his wife and children before they split, why he had once gone on a literal knife-wielding rampage, slashing and cutting up all of his old football pictures while his wife watched. The Ritalin that the doctors prescribed him, a drug that helps with focus and attention, often used for kids with ADHD, yeah, that was a band-aid on a gunshot wound. That's also how you could describe Mike Webster's oral hygiene. His teeth began rotting, then falling out. Mike didn't want to be toothless, that's a dragon's name, so he began supergluing his rotted, fallen teeth back into his gums. His feet and fingers were so torn apart, filled with calluses and cracking all over, that he began wrapping them tightly in duct tape, afraid his own skin was going to fall off. He fought for years against the NFL to get disability payments, something the league tried their hardest to avoid giving him. Writing Mike a check would be admitting liability. It would be admitting that whatever happened to Mike, whatever destroyed the man stronger than steel, that it was caused by football. We, the NFL, are not willing to concede that point. The league continued to claim this through a battle in court, even after the NFL's own expert neurologist disagreed with them and said, no, Mike Webster was definitely disabled before he retired due to football. Mike died. Everyone does. Not everyone goes out with taser marks on their thighs, duct tape on their feet, or super glue in their mouth. Officially, it was a heart attack that did him in. He was 50. The year was 2002. This is not normal. Football is a violent game that breeds brain damage, and even for football, this is not normal. Unsurprisingly, it took a case to the extreme to really highlight the issue. It's an unattractive story no matter how you look at it. There is no hero to balance out the supervillain, just his victim. A once proud, strong man who represented a city known for steel. The people who admired him, who put him up on a pedestal as above human. The same people who had to watch his life fall apart in their own backyard in the city that was once his. Mike would wander around the streets of Pittsburgh, often stopping to talk to fans. Sometimes they were pleasant encounters. Sometimes Mike started rambling and ranting and got really upset for no reason. He didn't know why he was upset. You could find him asleep on the street near the Amtrak station. The city that once celebrated him on Sunday stepped over his body on their way to work on Monday. And of course, the supervillain. Mike eventually won some disability payments from the NFL, but he never lived to see them. The case stretched all the way to 2005, 3 years after his death. The league relented and gave in, not out of some moral change of heart, but because Mike Webster's condition became a public issue. It was a PR move. Mike Webster's son, a high schooler who lived in Wisconsin, moved back to Pittsburgh to help care for his father just a couple years before he died. They lived in a house paid for by a couple former Steelers players and one fan who had befriended Mike. His condition got worse. His son, Garrett Webster, was a big boy. The genetics seemed to have accidentally transferred more of Mike's heart than his height. Garrett is 6'9", 340 pounds. Garrett watched as his father was killed by an invisible force. Something happened inside him. He watched every night as Dad would casually hit himself over and over with tens of thousands of volts like it was melatonin. And even after all that, Garrett kept playing high school football. Addiction is a son of a bitch. Sometimes he watched his dad journal, something Mike did fairly often as he could feel his own mind slipping away and wanted to save whatever he had left. Here are 2 known excerpts from those journals. My mind slips. Thoughts get crossed. Cannot find my words. Feel really alone. Sometimes simple spelling becomes a chore. I think something is seriously damaged in my brain, too. Another just says, I'm afraid I'm going to fail. This is what it took. The most extreme of cases. A man who died before his body did. A pillar of football, watched by those who loved him as he crumbled to a state worse than death. Shortly after, at the Allegheny County Coroner's Office during his autopsy, Mike Webster was diagnosed with chronic traumatic encephalopathy. He was the first person to ever formally be diagnosed with CTE. He was far from the last. Boxing is pretty cool. Now there's a sport that said, to hell with safety. We are 2 guys in a ring punching each other. We know the risks. It would be unfair and wrong to say that's the only reason that boxing has seen its popularity drop from its peak so many decades ago. It does play a factor, so do a lot of other things. With former boxers, it's pretty easy to see the effects of decades of sparring, constant massive blows to the head. I don't think I'll catch a lot of flack for saying boxing is dangerous. I mean, that's part of the appeal. It's macho cool. Hitting people is an inherently human thing to watch. That's kind of weird. It's clear, it's easy. But here is what's insane. We have known that boxing is super bad for your head for like 100 years as an established scientific fact. It's unbelievable. Even those inferior humans of 1920 with their Homo sapien level brains were able to piece together that, well, this or this or this, is bad for head. It's not hard to find retired boxers who have trouble thinking, doing things on their own, even just getting words out. We had to watch Muhammad Ali go through the entire cycle in front of us with cameras on him all along. He had Parkinson's, and though it probably wasn't all to blame on boxing, there are genetic factors, it's well agreed upon that being a pro boxer puts you way more at risk for things like Parkinson's and dementia, memory loss diseases. Repeated head trauma is directly linked to them. We know this for a fact. Boxers will admit it themselves, but boxers have historically had their own name for it. We've actually known that head injuries hitting your brain is really bad and can lead to weird things for like hundreds of years. It dates back at least to a man named Phineas Gage, an American railroad worker from the Northeast who was born in 1823. 40 years before the Civil War, nearly 200 before the cartoon that bears his name would release. What was there to do for Phineas? You could always do trains. One day he was working on laying some new railroads, setting down some new train tracks, and then out of nowhere there was a boom. A little explosion sent debris flying everywhere, and a giant rod flew up and impaled Phineas Gage in the face. It went like straight through his brain and eye, and Phineas, the little Gage that he is, survived. After, he seemed fine to the doctors, good as new, walking and talking, just lost an eye is all. But when he got back home and he saw his friends, they could all tell he was different. It was like his personality had been swapped with someone else, and they no longer saw him as the Phineas Gage they knew. This is one of the first documented cases when we started to notice that messing up our brain up there, it can do some really weird things, and it might even be linked to our personality. A while later, in 1872, the head of an insane asylum in England wrote that concussions, and especially multiple concussions, could result in mental infirmary and moral delinquency. We've actually known what concussions are for like hundreds of years, maybe even like 1,000. It's been a while. On that 1905 Harvard football team, where Theodore Roosevelt Jr. took his good deal of hits, they had a team doctor who studied concussions directly. He took them extremely serious, benching star players when they were showing warning signs. Teddy Jr. played on the freshman team, so he likely wasn't looked at as close. But that doctor diagnosed 19 concussions over the course of the 1905 season. On many of those occasions, he made the player affected leave the game. Benching a guy for a head injury in football was not sacrilegious, un-American in 1905 like we might think. It was happening. We have known how scary, how dangerous concussions are for a while. We have known not to mess with them. Crazy people doctors in 19th century Europe were able to come to the same conclusions that college football doctors in the 20th century came to, and the same conclusions that football, specifically the NFL, would one day, decades down the line, spend millions of dollars and multiple years fighting to deny. But boxing didn't deny anything. The sport almost cared about the health and safety of its athletes a little. It's weird. Would you believe me if I told you CTE existed long before Mike Webster was quote-unquote the first person diagnosed in 2002? It was 1928 when a guy in New Jersey, a doctor named Harrison, took on the sport of boxing. See, Harrison's thing was that he would go around and look at jobs where people got hurt a lot in New Jersey. Then he would examine the injuries and tell them how to not get hurt anymore in New Jersey. He started by performing an autopsy on a former professional boxer, and what he saw caused him to name an entirely new disease, and he wrote about it in a medical journal. Here's an excerpt. Quote, "For some time, fight fans and promoters have recognized a peculiar condition occurring among prize fighters, which, in ring parlance, they speak of as punch drunk." Punch drunk was also the title at the top of that write-up. And so, punch drunk syndrome was discovered. The phrase describes that sort of disconnected way some former boxers act, the same way some former football players act, the same way Mike Webster acted after his career. You can't describe it as just sad, depressed, or anxious, suicidal, lonely. It is so much more complex. So you just say punch drunk. And then, well, yeah, that's kind of it. The next decades consisted of more science that strengthened that point and saw concussions become a real fear widely accepted as serious. In 1933, the NCAA released a medical handbook meant to help educate athletes on the various injuries they faced. It stressed the seriousness of concussions for athletes of all sports in general, emphasizing not to brush them off or take them lightly, as well as saying, quote, There is definitely a condition described as punch drunk, and often recurrent concussion cases in football and boxing demonstrate this. Punch drunk syndrome was real, recognized medical terminology. By the 1950s, it was sometimes referred to as dementia pugilistica, that is, boxing-related memory issues, as well as chronic traumatic encephalopathy, that is, long-term persistent brain injury. Both those terms appeared in a 1952 medical journal about punch drunk syndrome, which said anyone who had 3 concussions in their life or who lost consciousness for any amount of time more than a couple seconds should stop playing contact sports completely right away. It again admitted that college sports authorities were, quote, conscious of the pathology of the punch-drunk boxer. So, there it is. I mean, we just went over that, right? We just talked about punch-drunk syndrome, right? I just want to make sure I'm not going crazy. That all happened, right? Terry. Old Terry. Yeah, his name was Terry Long. For about 5 years there in the 1980s, while Mike Webster anchored the Pittsburgh Steelers' offensive front, the man to his right, he who squatted alongside him, was Terry Long, the right guard from East Carolina University. Terry was also undersized, 5 feet 11 inches of him, got down into a 3-point stance every play on the east side of Mike Webster's hips. While Mike had made up for his lack of size with heart, Terry did it through sheer strength. He could overpower you, I promise. He didn't even play football in high school, just a couple games at the very end of his senior season. Then he went into the service as a parachute jumper, making a living hopping out of working airplanes, and actually learned the ins and outs of the games while stationed at Fort Bragg. After the Army, Terry wanted an education. He liked East Carolina University, close to home, so he found their football coach. You got 10 seconds to sell yourself. Why you, the 5'11 kid, fresh out of the military with no football experience, deserves a spot on this roster. Terry Long did a front flip. No shit. Terry weighed 270 pounds. Yeah, give him a spot on the football team. He started all 4 years, was an All-American as a senior. He could dunk a basketball, he could run a 4.7 40, and he could squat about 830 pounds. Coming out of college, Terry wasn't a dumb guy. He had a working, functional brain. He knew the Pirates of East Carolina were far from a blue blood. I mean, they're purple. They're not known for pumping out NFL prospects. So he entered a powerlifting competition to give NFL teams a fully objective, not Division 1 or 2, Power 5 SEC, just straight up knowledge of how strong Terry was. The average human man weighs just under 200 pounds. Terry squatted 4 humans and like the legs of a 5th. He bench pressed 2.5 humans, and his deadlift was 40 pounds off the world record. He lifted 865 pounds off the ground. His 3-number total would have been first place in that year's Powerlifting World Championships. That bought Terry a golden ticket, one with a black pattern, redeemable in the 4th round of the NFL Draft. He stayed there for his whole 8-season career. The Steelers sucked. Poor Terry didn't get in on any of the fun Super Bowls or dynasty time. He just put his head down and worked. Multiple times in his career, he was the smallest starting offensive lineman in the league. He wasn't a superstar. His every move wasn't followed and written about. He was just Terry, another cog in the NFL machine. We see these guys as above us, like they're all stars, but in reality, you wouldn't recognize 90% of them if they walked down the street. Most of them are just guys, working their job, living their life. Most of them are just Terry. In 1991, right before the start of the season, his career was winding down. That wasn't a secret. Terry just sped up the winding. The Steelers' head coach, a good one, the one who led him through the dynasty, a guy named Chuck, called Terry Long into his office one day. He was quiet and serious, handed Terry a drug test, his own, that read positive for steroids. He was being suspended by the NFL. From the outside looking in, it seems like this is where it all went wrong. In reality, this is just when we started hearing about it. Terry Long pulled a gun out in his coach's office. He didn't point it at Chuck or himself or make any threats. He just made sure Chuck saw it. Then Terry drove home. He took a handful of sleeping pills in an attempt to end his own life. When his girlfriend walked in and freaked out, running to call 911, Terry then digested some rat poison to speed up the process. He would miraculously survive. He even rejoined the team this very season, but it was his last season. Terry retired and slipped further away from football with every day that came. He'd be invited but never show up at Steeler alumni events, community volunteering stuff. Football moved on. It kept going without him. Terry Long was a cup of water in the ocean of used tos and once upon a times. He didn't know that he was already damaged irreversibly. Should he have known? Should someone have told him? Terry disappears. For years, we don't hear from him. Why would we? He never heard about you. Unbeknownst to us, he had started a business. He had worked his ass off to make it successful. Not in the gym, not on the field, no. By waking up and working hard at a 9 to 5. It was a processing company. They would give ready-to-eat produce to giant supermarket chains. They made it big. The first we heard was in 2003, and it was not good news. Terry Long, former Steeler offensive lineman one lifetime ago, is now aching over the news that his processing plant burnt down last night in a horrible fire. That's not good news. You want to know what's worse? Well, we found out that Terry Long burnt it down himself to try and get the insurance money. A couple months after this news broke, Terry Long asked his pastor if he could have a moment to speak to the entire congregation. He wanted to inform them of the headlines that they were about to see, that were about to be public across the country, about the ex-Steeler guilty of insurance fraud. His pastor said, "Of course, I'll let you talk to everyone." Days later, before their next service, when he was to give that talk, Terry Long drank an unspecified amount of antifreeze and passed away. It was ruled a suicide. He died in Pittsburgh. He was looked at by the very same coroner that looked at Mike Webster. He saw the very same thing. Brain trauma caused, at least in part, by repeated long-term hits to the head was the main contributing factor to Terry's suicide. He was the second former NFL player to be diagnosed with chronic traumatic encephalopathy, just to the right of Mike Webster, right where Terry belongs. There's something primal about the sport of football. There's a rhythm to it that's older than concussions and rules about safety. It's older than the game itself, older than all sports, but it's still there, recognizable and constant. Every decision you make on the field, in the wild, on a battleground, is a negotiation with mortality. It's a transaction. You give a little bit more of yourself, of your body, and you get a little more food on your table, a little closer to glory. You are gambling your own health for survival, for success. It's an appealing offer at its core, and gambling is an addiction. The date was September 25th, 2022. It was a Sunday in Miami that afternoon. The matchup was mildly exciting. The Josh Allen-led Buffalo Bills saw the Miami Dolphins, headed by Tua Tagovailoa. Though the Bills have dominated this division rivalry since Allen entered the league, both teams came in at 2-0 with high promise for the season. The game lived up to it. 14-14 late in the second quarter, Miami has a 3rd and short. Tua stepped back into quick pressure, scrambled out a little, and made a great throw for a first down. After he released the ball, it wasn't even caught on live broadcasts. A Bills linebacker laid a light push on him. It was a little late, nothing crazy, but a flag was thrown for roughing the passer. Fair. Tua's head happened to take all the momentum of his body swinging down and slammed against the ground pretty good. He tried to stand up, stumbled a little bit, and literally shook it off. He jogged about 5 steps, then his body just stopped working. It shut down. He lost his footing out of nowhere. Stumbling, his offensive lineman grabbed him and held him upright while the team doctor started running over there a lot faster. Concussions can be a bit of a subjective thing. If you take a big hit to the head in any manner, you might go to the doctor and get diagnosed with one. You might not. There can be dizziness, fogginess, the headaches, and even mood changes. Really, it's a form of a TBI, a traumatic brain injury. There's a little bit of extra space there. Your brain doesn't take up all of your head, and there's also some fluid that it sits in. It's pretty easy to visualize. A concussion is literally your brain rattling around inside your skull in that loose, empty space. 2 concussions in a small amount of time, like getting a second one before your first has fully healed, is very well known to be a deadly danger. Second impact syndrome, as it's known, is rare, but it will often kill you and almost always leaves victims paralyzed. At a football game in September in 2022, the Miami Dolphins put their quarterback in what is known as concussion protocol. Have the doctors check him out, make sure he's okay. Somehow, after being unable to stand on his own, Tua cleared concussion protocol and returned to the game right after halftime. It was less than 1 hour after his concussion in real time. The NFL has since added a rule formed around this incident and literally nicknamed the Tua rule that just clearly says if a player demonstrates not being able to stand or balance while walking, they are done from that game, no questions asked. Just 4 days later, the Dolphins had a quick turnaround with a Thursday night football game. Thursday night games have been pretty consistently chastised by players and fans for a way too quick turnaround that leads to plain and simple bad football games. Many also fear that 2 games in 5 days increases the chances of a player getting hurt. But the NFL wants to own another day of the week, so we put up with it. In the second quarter, Tua dropped back and was spun around on a pretty textbook sack. As the defender threw his body to the ground, his head once again took all of that momentum and whipped down hard. This time, Tua did not get up. He wasn't unconscious at all, it seems, but in video that is so horrible to watch, it is age-restricted on YouTube, his body locked up to an involuntary position, with his hands and fingers, stuck and all flexed differently. It was horrible. He left the game on a stretcher. This is known neurologically as a fencing response. There are real reasons our bodies do this, like chemically or medically or whatever, but in general, it's a pretty clear indicator that, yeah, you suffered a horrible head injury. There are multiple examples of it happening in the NFL. A lot of people came out and started calling publicly for Tua Tagovailoa to retire from football after this game. Happening on a Thursday night, this concussion had primetime privilege. It happened with a national television audience and thus got a lot of conversations going from people watching. Conversations about concussions, about if football was safe, about if we need to cancel the sport, about the poor players out there and how they were actively killing themselves. Conversations not too unlike the ones Teddy Roosevelt dealt with a little over 100 years ago. You think you're the first to try and destroy football? Take a number, kid. People have died fighting on the ground you stand. 3 weeks later, Tua came back and started at quarterback. After losing both their 2 games in his absence, the Dolphins went on a 5-game win streak. Headlines quickly shifted from worrisome unknowns about the future to, oh boy, those Dolphins are rolling and Tua's throwing that darn ball, isn't he? The problem goes away. It takes care of itself. Later that same season, on Christmas Day, about 3 months after the second concussion, Tua hits his head again. It is later identified as a concussion, however, no one sees it or takes him out of the game. After it happens, he throws 3 interceptions in the second half and looks like a noticeably different player. And it isn't till a couple days after that that he is diagnosed with his 3rd concussion of the year. He misses the Dolphins' final 2 games. Over the offseason, he contemplates retirement, while many others encourage him to prioritize his health and stop playing the game. Other NFL football players were begging him to retire in public. His mother asked him to quit. He's already made millions, but he won't quit. Make no mistake, Tua Tagovailoa is addicted to football, just like you and me are. The only logical explanation for him continuing to play is addiction. It is a textbook definition example. The only explanation for us continuing to watch it every Sunday is the same thing. 2 seasons later, Tua got another concussion, again in a game against the Bills. He once again went into the fence in response. One Dolphins lineman made eye contact with Tua on the ground and said it didn't look like Tua was actually there, in his own body. It was just his eyes staring blankly. It was his third diagnosed NFL concussion and fourth overall, including one he got in college. All four came within a 5-year period. And remember, that's not even including the one where Tua couldn't walk after because the Dolphins somehow deemed he was okay to go back and didn't have a concussion. Tua is still in the NFL today. He didn't listen to the requests for retirement. He's experienced a noticeable regression in his abilities over the last 2 years. Maybe it's unexplainable. Maybe he just naturally deteriorated somehow. It happens. Or maybe the explanation is very obvious and staring us in the face. Justin Strelzik was his name. He was like the others. He was added to the list, the third NFL player ever diagnosed with CTE. Once he was a little kid, obsessed with football. Then, he was on the iron line, on the far right side, touching toes with Terry Long at right guard. Justin Strelzik was the right tackle for the Pittsburgh Steelers. He never actually got to play with Mike Webster. Their careers just missed each other, but it is no coincidence that 3 Steeler offensive linemen were the first 3 dominoes to fall. When he was driving 100 miles per hour on the wrong side of the highway in New Jersey with police lights flashing in his rearview mirror, having been chased for over 40 miles now, it was purely tragic. He hit a tanker head-on and died. He was 36. It wasn't unprecedented. Before his 30-minute high-speed chase into death, he had struggled. Ever since he'd retired from the NFL and lost his purpose, he'd struggled. It's common among players. Once he got into an argument with a friend about gun control, a debate that ended with Strelzik flashing a gun from his pocket. That didn't help his case. He liked alcohol and grew fond of cars after drinking it. He'd lost his license and earned a DUI. Justin Strelzik's brain was diagnosed with CTE, the third NFL player to ever get it. He was also, at this point, the third player ever examined for the disease. 3 for 3. If that number keeps growing and keeps staying such a high percentage, we could have trouble. Omalu. Bennett Omalu was his name. It's Nigerian. Omalu is actually the shortened version of the full family name, Unyamalakubwe. It translates directly to one who knows should speak. Bennett Omalu is a man that exudes intelligence and controversy. They both follow him around like disease. He's from Nigeria. The country was war-torn in his childhood, so he moved around. He came to America to further his education, and he did not stop furthering his education. His technical title, if I was to be respectful, is Bennett Omalu, MD, MBA, MPH, CPE, DA, BPA, PCP, FP, NP? Bennett never played football. He didn't know the rules, actually. I'm confident he could have learned them if he wanted to. His education started at the University of Nigeria, then to the University of Washington, hopped over to Columbia for some prestige, then found himself at the University of Pittsburgh. He settled down in Pitt, got a good job at the Allegheny County Coroner's Office. He was the chief medical examiner. He performed autopsies of the deceased in Pittsburgh. One day, a body came across his table. Bennett's workspace is not the place you want your body to be. The coroner's office was buzzing that day, a sad type of buzz. There was a body they all knew well in there. A man who was once a king to many of them, a man who they watched fall from royalty. It was the body of Mike Webster, former starting center for the Steelers dynasty. Bennett Omalu looked at him quickly. You don't generally get an autopsy when you die of a heart attack, but you also, remember, don't generally have taser marks all over your body and super glue in your mouth. Bennett was intrigued. That doesn't just happen. Heart attacks don't cause that. He decided to order a full post-mortem and cut right into the body and the brain of Pittsburgh's hero. All the answers we needed were found inside of him. When Bennett removed Mike Webster's brain, it looked, well, how do I even put this? It was like normal. He called the moment he saw the brain, seemingly in fine condition, the biggest surprise of his medical career. Mike Webster's brain appeared to be that of a functioning 50-year-old man. It wasn't until the brain was put under a microscope and cut up into pieces, literal slices of brain for a visualization on how they do it, it's like cutting a prime rib, that the truth would reveal itself. I'm not going to get into the specifics of the neurology, it would bore you guys, and much more importantly, I'm not smart enough to understand it, but the very well-educated man named Bennett, who performed the autopsy, said that the inside of Mike's brain was to a normal brain what a demolished building was to a new hotel. He compared it to examining the brain of an 85-year-old Alzheimer's patient. That's what it looked like and reminded him of. Protein that should be spread around your brain was built up in these clumps in certain spots. Omalu did not need anything else. He was certain of the cause. Mike Webster's brain had suffered degenerative brain damage caused by repeated head trauma that spiraled his mental state beyond repair. Football had killed the man. Have you ever bought something? How about this? Have you ever bought something online? If you have, I think today's sponsor can help you out greatly. This video is sponsored by coupert. Coupert is an automatic coupon finder that uses AI to help you track down the best deals the internet has to offer. If you click the link in the description, you can download Coupert for free and start testing it out yourself. Now, Coupert is so confident in their product that they will literally give you money if you are able to find any coupon they don't already have, or if you go more than 3 purchases without them saving you money. Whatever your next purchase is, just give Coupert a try and save yourself money. The interface is so easy. All you have to do is type in the name of a store or website and you will be flooded with potential discounts on all sorts of different things. Again, click the link in the description or pinned comment to download Coupert now and let me know how much money you save. It was a pretty simple thing to Bennett Omalu. He found something in this sport, football, that could destroy people's brains and thus their lives. It could kill them. Shouldn't they at least know this? Know what they're risking? Mike Webster had no documented concussions, yet his head had still turned to mush. Bennett wanted to tell the world. He wanted to tell the NFL. And he figured they would want to listen. Yeah, Bennett wasn't familiar with football. It was in a popular medical science journal called Neurosurgery, where he released his first report. It was entitled Chronic Traumatic Encephalopathy in a National League Football Player. It was 2005, a few years after Mike had died and Omalu had begun working on this. This is often considered to be the discovery of CTE, which is interesting and wrong. You remember punch-drunk syndrome? That's a thing, very known. We talked about that, right? We even know that Bennett Omalu's paper was not even the first time that the phrase chronic traumatic encephalopathy was used. Not even close. There are whole medical research papers titled CTE in boxers from decades earlier. Bennett's paper doesn't really claim that he's discovering it either. He calls it the first diagnosis in an NFL player, which it is. He also credits numerous older studies that found similar things in boxers, studies that mostly referred to it as punch-drunk syndrome. But oddly, Bennett doesn't actually mention the words punch-drunk in his paper the entire time. I'm not sure if he believed CTE to be separate from punch-drunk, or if he thought his discovery was like the next evolution and he was changing the name. It's a little confusing. Regardless, in time, this would be lauded as the discovery of CTE, and even if he didn't say it outright in this first paper, even if he didn't originally intend to, Bennett Omalu would eventually claim to have discovered CTE. He very much so branded himself as the one who founded the disease. He's even claimed to come up with the name, which is insane to say. Punch-drunk syndrome became completely overlooked and forgotten in mainstream media. Today, Punch drunk is considered an outdated and inaccurate term for CTE. Boxers and every other athlete are now lumped into CTE. When Bennett Omalu released this article, buried in a medical journal, no one really cared. It went unnoticed. How naive Bennett was to think that the fans and the league would care. They would want to know and want to protect their players. No, the fans really didn't care, and the league, well, they actively wanted to kill the story and prevent anyone else from knowing. In due time, the next year, after the NFL realized this paper existed, they publicly requested for it to be retracted. That says a lot. To tell a group of doctors that co-sign this thing that they are all wrong, that they need to take their words back off the scientific record, that's not a light accusation. They accused Bennett Omalu of being a nobody in the field, his football knowledge non-existent, his science elementary, and the world unfair to billion-dollar sports leagues. And credit to him, Omalu refused to take anything back. So, the story kept going. The NFL really attacked him for focusing in on one person. This was just one unnamed NFL player, who was actually Mike Webster. That is actually a fair point from the NFL. I mean, you need a larger sample size. We were 1-for-1 with Mike, but that's not enough. The story had to keep going. The story had to keep getting better. Here is what sucks. CTE can only be identified or diagnosed in a dead person. This is a very key piece of information. You have to be able to really see the inside of their brain, even cut it into pieces in many cases, to be able to know for sure. This makes things extremely difficult. Mike was followed by Terry, then Justin Strelzik, who actually died before Terry, but his tests weren't revealed until later. The first 3 people to get CTE were not Pittsburgh Steelers. They were just the first 3 that were diagnosed with it, because the only one who cared to diagnose anyone right now was the coroner in Pittsburgh named Bennett Omalu. Others would follow. Not in any chronological order came Ray and Philip and Ken, George and Mark, Rick and Chuck. Kids who liked football, who played it, who made their wildest dreams come true of doing it at the highest level, who had no idea what it was slowly doing to them. Of the first 10 NFL players tested, only 1 was negative. That being Damian Nash, who only played 6 games in a very quick career. By 2010, Bennett Omalu wasn't the only one anymore. Neuroscientists across the country were now curious, attempting to secure the brains of NFL players to run them through tests. The NFL's reaction to this was pretty consistent. Deny the absolute hell out of everything. But that wasn't enough. After they had requested that Omalu retract his original paper, he refused, and he just kept writing new papers every time he would diagnose someone new, each one strengthening the sample size and thus the overall legitimacy. The NFL realized that if they couldn't make him take back his words, they should just attack the source. The league began going after Bennett Omalu, a scorched earth, directly targeted campaign of hatred. They attempted to discredit the man and his research by personally attacking him, alleging that his science was completely flawed. The NFL actually had started a committee a while ago, in the 90s, called the Mild Traumatic Brain Injury Committee. It was dedicated to making the game safer, studying concussions for the NFL. From the time it was created to the time Bennett Omalu diagnosed Mike Webster with CTE, the committee had done nothing. Like, absolutely nothing. It was there for decoration, a PR move so the league could say, look, we care about player safety. In response to emerging studies from Omalu and the rest of the neuroscience community, the NFL went out and got a ton of doctors to add to this committee. Many of them were well-respected people, highly sought-after surgeons and medical experts, people who were much more well-known in the field than Bennett Omalu. Just under half of them were employed by NFL teams as team doctors. The man in charge of the committee, the head of it, was a rheumatologist who had no background in brain science at all. The NFL committee released their own study, saying, do not listen to that other guy talking about football is dangerous, it's destroying our brains slowly. No, none of that's true. In fact, if you suffer a mild traumatic brain injury, according to the NFL in 2005, it is fully safe to come back and keep playing that very same day. That is a real statement that NFL-employed doctors tried to pass off. They got to this conclusion through a study of their own, analyzing concussions between the years 1996 and 2001 in the NFL. They reported that the effects of these head injuries were being completely overstated. They weren't that bad. Yeah, some guys got concussions, but you get better. More than 10 respected doctors with full medical degrees put their names on this report. It is truly horrifying. It was later found that this NFL-commissioned study had completely left off over 100 diagnosed concussions across the league from their time period. Concussions that happened were reported and recorded, and the NFL just omitted them from the research paper, acted like they didn't exist. Those numbers didn't support the NFL's point, so they weren't there. Buried in the report, an example as to how laughable their attempt at making these claims were, the league had tried to say that in this 5-year span, the Dallas Cowboys football team had suffered 0 total concussions. Not a single player on the team got one in 5 seasons. They thought this would work, that we wouldn't notice. It kinda did work, even though we noticed. This is beyond a lie. It's beyond misinformation. Here is Hall of Famer Troy Aikman, suffering the concussion that famously ended his career in the year 2000. It was one of multiple documented concussions he received that season alone. They say defense wins championships. This, the MTBI committee, was the NFL's version of playing defense. It's so obviously false, it's almost sloppy. For a good, experienced criminal like the NFL, you'd expect higher quality gaslighting. Honestly, it's a move that screams desperate. Javon was desperate. He was lost, confused, hurting, a lot of other things, but he was definitely desperate. You don't do what he did if you're not desperate. He wasn't born that way. I really don't think anyone is. Javon would buy 1 box of Thin Mints, leave $20 at the Girl Scout cookies table, tell him to keep the change, then forget his box on purpose. Javon watched a man's suitcase break off its handle at the airport. He didn't know the guy. He picked it up and walked with the guy all the way to his gate. They became close friends. Javon liked football. He was a hell of a player, too. Him and his buddies could name rosters of players from the NFL in the late 90s. You're there, laughing one day, when your friend blurts out the name of the Vikings' old second-string tight end. You laugh, nostalgically. What a pull. You start thinking of the most random player you can think of. You crack open a beer. You watch a game on a Monday night. Life is alright. Are you, Javon? The link was the key. It was all about the link. Is the sport of football directly linked to memory issues and brain damage? The NFL said no. They kicked out their old joke of a committee and they started a new one, Get Committified. One of the doctors who had previously signed off on some of the NFL's false studies was named the head of the newly called Concussion Committee. It was formed in 2007. A couple years later, 2009, the NFL is summoned before Congress, with Commissioner Roger Goodell being thrown into open waters. He plays the denial card early and often, saying, "There's no link between football and head trauma," and shoving any tough questions aside as, "Oh, that's probably something that I should leave for the experts to answer. I just run a football institution." During this congressional hearing, one person in a fancy suit makes a fascinating connection when they compare the National Football League to Big Tobacco of yesteryear. A massive product dominating the country until we figure out, wait, this is super bad for your long-term health. But then we have to spend decades in rooms like this while the NFL, or while Big Tobacco, lies to us, tries to tell us, no, guys, it's not dangerous, come on, we love football/cigarettes. The connecting lines are painfully obvious. It almost feels like a case of deja vu, and it does not paint the NFL in a pretty light. It doesn't paint them a pretty future if they follow that path. In 2010, after just 3 years of existence, the NFL's Concussion Committee folded, with a legacy of denial and misinformation, along with Well, nothing else. That's it. The scandal began trending towards mainstream. Concussion Gate was on the NFL's radar, the media's radar, and a lot of lawyers' radars. In 2011, a huge group of retired NFL players, more than 4,500 of them, sued the NFL, alleging that the league knowingly hid the effects of long-term head trauma from its players. Within a few years, the lawsuit settled, with the NFL agreeing to pay $765 million to the group of players. Extremely important to note was the terms of the settlement. The NFL did not admit any wrongdoing. They took no liability. This was not them saying the players' claims were legit. It was just them giving $765 million to make it go away. That's normal behavior from an innocent person. This means we didn't get to dig into the NFL's books and records in a trial to find out exactly what they knew about football head trauma and when. In 2012, Junior Seau, a former superstar linebacker and future Hall of Famer, killed himself. He had only retired from football 2 years earlier. This was instantly a high-profile case based just on how popular Seau was. Many mistakenly believe that Junior Seau shot himself in the chest, leaving a note that said he wanted to save his head for CTE research. This is untrue. It was actually Dave Duerson, the former Chicago Bear who killed himself a year earlier, who left that note. The alumni of the NFL is a grim group to be a part of. Because both shot themselves in the chest, many believe Seau had the same reasoning and was almost inspired in a dark way by Duerson to keep his brain intact. The entire country held its breath as we all awaited the news we knew would come. The news that Junior Seau had CTE and that football was a factor in his suicide. Bennett Omalu was contacted to do the autopsy. He called Junior Seau's son and got consent to use his father's brain for research. Omalu arrived that day in San Diego. He went to the coroner's office, got his scrubs on, and began examining the body of an NFL player, as he had done many times before by now. Then, someone burst through the door. Get that man away from that brain. The unexpected visitor was an NFL representative. It seems like a scene made for a movie about dramatic autopsies. He informed everyone, with his eyes locked on Omalu, that Junior Seau's son had pulled his consent for Omalu to perform the autopsy. What had really happened was the NFL heard about Omalu's involvement and called up Seau's son on their own, the kid who was grieving his father's suicide that happened just days before. They told him, oh, this Bennett Omalu guy, he's bad news, bad scientist, uncredible, sometimes his socks are stinky. They basically gave the kid the same discredit Omalu spiel that they'd been giving the whole world. And it worked. The kid pulled his consent. Omalu was pulled out of the room as the autopsy was beginning at the last minute, and the NFL instead got to send the brain to a place of their choosing. They chose the NIH, the National Institute of Health. They saved themselves. They got the brain away from Bennett Omalu and helped protect the reputation of football. The next day, the National Institute of Health diagnosed Junior Seau with CTE, as his brain had one of the most severe cases ever recorded. The NFL had no escape. Later that year, the NFL started to get worried. Numbers in youth football began to trend downwards. The league implemented the Heads Up program, trying to teach people to tackle safely with good form in a way that was supposedly safer for your head because you're keeping it up while tackling. In 2013, amidst the hoopla, 49ers linebacker Chris Borland, who had just finished up a very solid rookie season, shocked the football world by retiring at 24 years of age for the sole reason of CTE fear. He became known as the most dangerous player in the NFL, not for hard hits, but because of the risk that people like him presented to the sport. Later in 2013, Aaron Hernandez, who had just finished up his third season as a tight end with the New England Patriots, finished up his first murder, killing a man, and is arrested. Years later, he will take his own life while in jail. His brain will be found to have what was described as the worst case of CTE ever found in someone under the age of 30. By 2014, the argument had grown undeniable. 79 brains of former NFL players had been looked at for CTE. 76 of them had it, a 96% hit rate. Outside of Omalu, many others, notably Boston University, which has become the center of CTE research, were going out of their way to try and get football brains to test. It was a literal race for brains. Making the phone call to the family of a recently passed NFL star and asking, hey, any chance I can get his brain? It's a weird thing to have to do. The media termed it the concussion crisis, and it became a national headline issue. In 2015, Will Smith starred in a movie titled Concussion, where he played Dr. Bennett Omalu and represented his struggles against the NFL. A league representative was quoted at this time saying that if the NFL lost support from just 10% of moms in America, then football would die. You have to have the moms on your side. Well, from 2006 to 2017, the amount of kids playing youth football dropped from 8.4 million to 5.22 million. A real dent was made. Damage was being done. The NFL was worried, clearly. They never had to be worried. We've been here before. History can be a son of a bitch. What would Teddy do? What did Teddy do? He made the NCAA. They changed some football rules. He didn't really make the game safer, but we say he did. Okay, good idea. In 2016, the NFL finally admitted, through the league's top health official, while he was being questioned by Congress, that there was indeed, certainly, a link between football and chronic traumatic encephalopathy. This simple sentence by itself undid over a decade of deliberate lies from the NFL that they told knowing they were untrue to try and protect their brand. It was the NFL lying in the hole that they had dug themselves. Better that than the graves they had dug their former players. Jovan was a Maine man. I don't mean that in a silly way. The guy chose Maine University. He played football, mainly a main stage middle linebacker for Maine. That one was silly. You become one of the best small school players in the country. What does that take? He was projected for the 6th round. He fell to the 9th round, undrafted, on an island. You fight onto the roster of an NFL team. What does that take? There were 53 Kansas City Chiefs in 2009. Jovan Belcher was one of them. Today, in 2025, 376 former NFL players have had their brains looked at after death. 345 of them were found to have CTE. That's about 92%. They're still happening today, more are being counted every year. But what happens with the world when the Will Smith movies leave theaters? The NFL doesn't meet with Congress to get chewed out anymore. Concussions aren't a topic on the news anymore. What really changed? It was trendy to care about CTE for a little bit. Remember, there's no concussion crisis, just carrying crises. Concussions aren't sentient. They don't decide they're going to start happening more in certain years. They've always been a part of football. They are football. And so, I don't know. What changed? I guess they killed kickoffs. They made roughing the passer overly sensitive. Sometimes guys wear big fluffy helmets on top of their smaller hard helmets now. We're saved. There's no need to worry. The NFL simply escaped, as they've done before. It's kind of like the world forgot the history. Everything that happened before the year 2000. We act like concussions and CTE popped up in our modern issues. We act like football hasn't been so close to being banned as a sport, like the president didn't have to get involved before, and like there wasn't a solid 80 years of established research and scientific literature on the subject of punch-drunk syndrome or chronic traumatic encephalopathy, whatever you want to call it. I think Bennett Omalu is more than partly to blame for this. While it really doesn't seem like he meant to in his first paper, there is no doubt that he would go on to proclaim himself as the man who discovered CTE. He even claimed to come up with a name that was in use decades before he was born. Honestly, it's a bending of the truth that the NFL was probably both jealous of and happy to entertain. The myth that Omalu discovered CTE allowed the NFL to sit there and say, yeah, it does look kind of bad, but it's such a new thing and we know so little about it. I think we just gotta wait on the studies to finish. The studies that finished 80 years ago, with decades of confirmation by now. It's weird. Bennett Omalu has separated himself more from the CTE field in recent years. The torch has been passed along to others, mainly Boston University. However, many in the field today, including those in Boston, are extremely critical of Omalu and his past research. He has lost credibility, even in the actual medical science field, due to his false claims of discovering CTE, his overly broad way of diagnosing the disease, and probably because the NFL's attacking of his reputation did have at least a little success. In 2016, when the league ate crow in front of Congress and CTE was being diagnosed at a rapid rate by doctors all over the country, while Bennett Omalu bought a DVD of a movie where he was portrayed by Will Smith, you could probably look at that scene and say, he won. The Nigerian doctor who got in over his head against a billion-dollar mega corporation in a sport he didn't know the rules of, well, he had beaten the NFL. The league was at his mercy. Fast forward to today, where the NFL is, well, the same, still king, and Bennett Omalu is only loosely involved with CTE research, looked down upon by many of his colleagues. It becomes very clear. Bennett Omalu had only won a single battle in a war that the NFL has been dominating for decades. It may have taken a while, and they may have had to pay a little bit. 765 million little bits. The league suffered through some real embarrassing moments on grand stages in America. But the NFL won. The story isn't over. That's a mistake we, the fans, are the ones to often make. The guy went to the University of Maine. He made the NFL. He's on the Chiefs roster. He plays linebacker on Sundays. His mission is accomplished. He beat life, made his dreams come true. Now he's a millionaire. It's hard for us not to make that mistake. Jovan Belcher, the kid who grew up watching football in New York, had not done anything yet. He was on the team. Now he had to establish himself there, give Kansas City a reason to keep him around. Once he did that, he had to play for his contract, proving on the field how much money he was worth. Then he had to fight for a starting spot. You have to fight for everything. Making the league is step one. The Chiefs also sucked. That didn't help. The team was abysmal. And then on top of that, there's also life. It's easy to forget about life. Jamal Charles was a running back for the Kansas City Chiefs, a teammate of Jovan's. One day, there was a team event. Jamal and Jovan saw each other, said, "What's up?" Jamal introduced Jovan to his cousin, a woman named Cassandra. It was a punch-drunk type of love from early on. High emotion, no matter the emotion. After Jovan started dating his running back's cousin, they were either in loud, expressive arguments or in loud, expressive love. Things only became more turbulent when Cassandra got pregnant. There were now like 45 good reasons for them to break up, but one really good one to stay. Her name was Zoe. How could a baby girl be anything but innocent? Jovan was a baby once too. He had no documented history of concussions. You could argue that's good for the league, good for football. You could also argue it's far more worrisome for football. It was really late on a Friday night, Saturday morning, technically. Jovan exchanged texts with a friend, a former teammate. The guy said, "I see you boys ain't doing too well. What's going on with you besides ball?" The Chiefs at the time are 1-10, in the middle of the season, limping towards the end of the year. Jovan responded, "Yeah, man, our O can't even put 7 in the board for us. But everything's good, bro. Baby mama crazy, but I have a little girl, almost 3 months, man, and she's a blessing. She makes me smile on the worst day." "Daughter," his friend replied. "That's awesome, man. You better get yourself a good gun to keep them boys away." "Yeah, man," Belcher said. "I got about 8 guns now, from handguns to assault rifles for her little boyfriends." Gun ownership among NFL players at this time, around 2012, was not only common, it was maybe at its highest mark ever. This is mainly due to star NFL player Sean Taylor, who was killed in a home robbery just 5 years before while trying to protect his family. Multiple players reported beefing their own security, including buying guns, attack dogs, and full in-house systems after this tragedy. Jovan Belcher owned his guns legally, had no criminal record, and was seen as a role model NFL player. He actually spent the night at a different apartment, not the one he shared with Cassandra. He had a team meeting scheduled at the Kansas City Chiefs training facility at 9:30 a.m. He woke up at 6:30 and drove back home to see his daughter and baby mama before it. The young parents started arguing, as they did so often. Cassandra's mother, the baby's grandma, was also in the house helping care for little Zoe. She had long learned to tune out the sound of fighting. It was background noise by now. Just after 7 a.m. on a Saturday morning, Jovan yelled, "You can't talk to me like that." He pointed a gun at Cassandra and pulled the trigger. He pulled it over and over again. Jovan Belcher killed the mother of his child by shooting her 9 times. Cassandra's mother walked in and saw her daughter's body. She called 911. You can barely hear either side of the phone call due to sounds of the crying baby drowning them both out. Jovan Belcher was already gone. He drove about 5 miles down the road to the Kansas City Chiefs training facility where his team meeting was. In the parking lot, he got out of his car. He had a gun in his hand. Someone who saw a security member quickly called the police. Scott Pioli, the general manager of the Chiefs, happened to be in the parking lot and saw Jovan. He pointed the gun at his own head. He yelled out, "I killed her." Pioli and the rest of the team's management were familiar with Jovan and Cassandra's issues. Jovan asked him to get Cronell and Gibbs, aka the Chiefs' head coach and linebackers coach. Pioli obliged, and quickly, Jovan Belcher was sitting in the training facility lot, gun to his head, and the management group of an NFL team in front of him, begging him to put it down. He thanked them for taking a chance on him. He requested they make sure his daughter was taken care of. He saw sirens approaching in the distance. A random man, unloading stuff from a truck into the facility, yelled that he was taking the easy way out. Jovan walked about 30 feet to the back of the parking lot and knelt down behind a car.
Well, Lake has simply been waiting on brain studies. There were not enough studies or medical proof for them to make a direct connection between football and CTE.
Belcher coming through, an undrafted kid out of Maine.
Wow. Woo. He kissed Marion Barber, and it's not even Valentine's Day.